Question 1. The efficiency study reveals potential discrepancies in Amkor Technology's inventory valuation methods that could impact reported profitability. Which of the following actions best aligns with regulatory compliance and ethical disclosure practices for a publicly traded company? Option A. Immediately initiate a comprehensive internal review of the inventory valuation methods, consulting with legal, accounting, and compliance teams to assess materiality and determine appropriate disclosure procedures in accordance with relevant securities laws and accounting standards. Option B. Disregard the study's findings, assuming the current valuation methods are standard practice and unlikely to be material enough to warrant further investigation or disclosure. Option C. Publicly announce the preliminary findings of the efficiency study to inform investors about potential inventory valuation issues, pending further internal analysis. Option D. Inform a select group of senior executives about the study's findings without any formal internal review or external disclosure, to allow for discrete internal adjustments. The correct answer is A. Immediately initiate a comprehensive internal review of the inventory valuation methods, consulting with legal, accounting, and compliance teams to assess materiality and determine appropriate disclosure procedures in accordance with relevant securities laws and accounting standards. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because Amkor Technology, as a publicly traded company, is subject to stringent regulatory requirements regarding financial reporting and disclosure. The efficiency study's findings, if material, could impact the company's financial statements and investor perceptions. The core challenge lies in determining the appropriate course of action to ensure compliance with relevant regulations while maintaining transparency and accuracy. Careful judgment is required to balance the need for timely disclosure with the potential for market disruption or misinterpretation. The correct approach involves a thorough internal review and consultation with legal and compliance departments. This ensures that any identified issues are assessed against the relevant regulatory framework, such as the Securities Exchange Act of 1934 and its associated rules, as well as any applicable accounting standards. This process allows Amkor Technology to gather all necessary facts, understand the potential implications, and prepare accurate disclosures in accordance with regulatory requirements. This approach upholds the principles of accurate financial reporting and investor protection mandated by regulatory bodies. An incorrect approach would be to ignore the findings of the efficiency study, assuming they are not significant enough to warrant attention. Failure to investigate could lead to material misstatements in financial reports, violating regulations that require accurate and complete disclosure of all material information. Another incorrect approach would be to disclose the preliminary findings of the study to the public without proper internal review and verification. This premature disclosure could mislead investors, create market volatility, and violate regulations concerning selective disclosure and the dissemination of material non-public information. Finally, attempting to conceal or downplay the findings internally without proper documentation or justification would be a severe ethical and regulatory breach, potentially leading to accusations of fraud or insider trading. Professionals should adopt a structured decision-making process that prioritizes regulatory compliance and ethical conduct. This involves 1. Identifying the potential regulatory implications of any new information or findings. 2. Conducting a comprehensive internal investigation to gather all relevant facts and assess materiality. 3. Consulting with legal, compliance, and accounting experts to interpret regulatory requirements and accounting standards. 4. Developing a clear and accurate disclosure strategy that adheres to all applicable regulations. 5. Documenting all steps taken and decisions made throughout the process. Question 2. Market research demonstrates that Amkor Technology is preparing a shipment of advanced semiconductor components to a new international market. To ensure a smooth customs clearance process and avoid potential penalties, which of the following approaches best aligns with regulatory compliance for international trade? Option A. Estimate the applicable duties and taxes based on general knowledge of international trade and proceed with the shipment, planning to resolve any discrepancies later if they arise. Option B. Prioritize the speed of the shipment by providing the most readily available information on the customs declaration, with the understanding that customs officials will flag any issues for later correction. Option C. Accurately classify the semiconductor components using the harmonized system, HS, code specific to the destination country's tariff schedule, and declare the correct customs value based on the transaction value, ensuring all required import permits are obtained. Option D. Rely on the documentation and customs declarations used for previous shipments to similar regions, assuming the regulations will be largely the same. The correct answer is C. Accurately classify the semiconductor components using the harmonized system, HS, code specific to the destination country's tariff schedule, and declare the correct customs value based on the transaction value, ensuring all required import permits are obtained. Explanation. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires Amkor technology to navigate the complexities of international trade regulations and ensure compliance with the specific requirements of the destination country's customs authorities. Misinterpreting or failing to adhere to these regulations can lead to significant financial penalties, delays in product delivery, damage to the company's reputation, and potential legal repercussions. Careful judgment is required to select the most accurate and compliant method of declaring goods. The correct approach involves meticulously reviewing the destination country's import regulations, including tariff codes, valuation rules, and any specific documentation requirements for the type of electronic components Amkor technology is exporting. This approach is best professional practice because it directly addresses the legal and regulatory obligations of international trade. By ensuring accurate classification and valuation of goods, Amkor technology minimizes the risk of customs disputes, penalties, and delays, thereby safeguarding its business operations and reputation. This aligns with the fundamental principle of regulatory compliance, which is paramount in international business. An incorrect approach that relies solely on past export practices without verifying current regulations is professionally unacceptable. This failure stems from a disregard for the dynamic nature of international trade laws, which can change without notice. Such an approach risks non-compliance due to outdated information, leading to potential penalties and customs issues. Another incorrect approach that involves estimating duties and taxes without consulting official tariff schedules or seeking expert advice is also professionally unacceptable. This method introduces a high degree of uncertainty and is prone to inaccuracies. It fails to meet the standard of due diligence required for customs declarations and can result in underpayment or overpayment of duties, both of which can trigger audits and penalties. Finally, an approach that prioritizes speed of shipment over accuracy of documentation is professionally unacceptable. While efficiency is important, it must not come at the expense of legal compliance. Customs authorities prioritize accurate declarations, and any attempt to expedite the process by providing incomplete or inaccurate information will likely lead to greater delays and more severe consequences once discrepancies are discovered. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with identifying the specific regulatory requirements of the destination country. This involves consulting official government customs websites, engaging with customs brokers or trade compliance specialists, and staying updated on any changes in import/export laws. The process should then involve gathering all necessary documentation, accurately classifying the goods using the harmonized system, HS, codes, determining the correct valuation, and preparing all required permits or certificates. A final review by a qualified individual before submission is crucial to ensure accuracy and compliance. Question 3. Upon reviewing a list of potential vendors for a critical component supply contract at Amkor Technology, an employee realizes that one of the leading vendors is owned and operated by their sibling. The employee is part of the team responsible for evaluating vendor proposals and making a final recommendation. What is the most appropriate course of action for this employee to take? Option A. Proceed with evaluating all vendors, including the siblings company, assuming their professional judgment will remain unbiased and that no disclosure is necessary. Option B. Immediately disclose the personal relationship to their direct supervisor and the company's compliance department, and request guidance on how to proceed, potentially recusing themselves from the vendor evaluation process. Option C. Discreetly attempt to steer the evaluation process in favor of the siblings company, believing it would be beneficial for both family and company. Option D. Continue with the evaluation process as normal, but avoid any direct communication or interaction with the siblings company during the evaluation period. Correct answer is B. Immediately disclose the personal relationship to their direct supervisor and the company's compliance department, and request guidance on how to proceed, potentially recusing themselves from the vendor evaluation process. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires an Amkor technology employee to navigate a situation where a potential conflict of interest could arise. The employee must balance their professional responsibilities with personal relationships, ensuring that company policies and ethical standards are upheld to maintain trust and integrity. Careful judgment is required to avoid even the appearance of impropriety. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves proactively disclosing the personal relationship to the appropriate supervisor or compliance department. This demonstrates transparency and adherence to Amkor Technology's Code of Conduct and any relevant internal policies regarding conflicts of interest. By disclosing, the employee allows the company to assess the situation and implement necessary safeguards, such as recusal from decision-making processes involving the vendor. This aligns with best practices in corporate governance and ethical conduct, preventing potential breaches of trust and regulatory noncompliance. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach is to proceed with the vendor selection process without disclosing the relationship. This failure to disclose is a direct violation of ethical principles and likely company policy, creating a significant conflict of interest. It undermines the integrity of the procurement process and could lead to accusations of favoritism or unfair dealing, potentially resulting in regulatory scrutiny and damage to Amkor Technology's reputation. Another incorrect approach is to assume that the personal relationship will not influence professional judgment, and therefore no disclosure is necessary. This is a flawed assumption, as even unconscious bias can affect decision-making. The appearance of a conflict of interest is often as damaging as an actual one. This approach neglects the company's need for objective vendor selection and could lead to a perception of unfairness among other vendors. A third incorrect approach is to attempt to conceal the relationship from colleagues and supervisors. This is a deliberate act of deception and a severe ethical breach. It not only violates company policy, but also erodes trust within the organization and could have serious legal and reputational consequences for both the employee and Amkor Technology if discovered. Professional reasoning. Professionals in such situations should follow a clear decision-making framework. 1. Identify potential conflicts of interest. Recognize when personal relationships or interests could interfere with professional duties. 2. Consult company policy. Review the organization's code of conduct, conflict of interest policy, and any relevant guidelines. 3. Disclose proactively. Inform the designated authority, supervisor, compliance officer about the potential conflict. 4. Seek guidance. Follow the company's instructions on how to manage the conflict, which may include recusal or other measures. 5. Document actions. Keep records of disclosures and decisions made. This systematic approach ensures compliance, maintains ethical standards, and protects the individual and the organization. Question 4. The risk matrix shows a moderate likelihood of unauthorized access to sensitive customer data processed by Amkor Technology. As the compliance officer, which of the following actions best addresses this finding while adhering to regulatory requirements? Option A. Immediately deploy a new firewall system to block all external access attempts, assuming this will resolve the unauthorized access risk. Option B. Conduct a thorough review of Amkor Technology's data processing agreements and internal policies to ensure they align with data protection laws, and then implement enhanced access controls and encryption based on the identified gaps. Option C. Implement a company-wide policy requiring all employees to change their passwords monthly without further investigation into the specific vulnerabilities identified. Option D. Advise the IT department to ignore the risk matrix finding, as it is a theoretical concern, and focus resources on more immediate operational issues. Correct answer is B. Conduct a thorough review of Amkor Technology's data processing agreements and internal policies to ensure they align with data protection laws, and then implement enhanced access controls and encryption based on the identified gaps. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because Amkor Technology's compliance officer must balance the need for efficient data processing with the stringent requirements of data privacy regulations. The risk matrix highlights potential vulnerabilities, but the officer's response must be grounded in a thorough understanding of the applicable legal framework, ensuring that any proposed solution does not inadvertently create new compliance risks or violate established data protection principles. Careful judgment is required to select an approach that is both effective and legally sound. The correct approach involves a comprehensive review of Amkor Technologies' data processing activities against the specific requirements of the relevant data privacy laws, followed by the implementation of technical and organizational measures to mitigate identified risks. This approach is correct because it directly addresses the findings of the risk matrix by ensuring that Amkor Technologies' practices align with legal obligations. It prioritizes a proactive and systematic method to data protection, which is a cornerstone of regulatory compliance. This includes, but is not limited to, ensuring lawful basis for processing, data minimization, purpose limitation, and robust security measures, all of which are mandated by data privacy frameworks. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on immediate technical fixes, without a broader legal review, fails to address the root causes of potential noncompliance. This could lead to superficial solutions that do not satisfy regulatory requirements, potentially exposing Amkor Technology to fines and reputational damage. Another incorrect approach that involves disregarding the risk matrix findings entirely represents a severe ethical and regulatory failure. It demonstrates a lack of due diligence and a disregard for the potential harm to individuals whose data is processed, directly contravening the principles of accountability and risk management embedded in data privacy laws. A third incorrect approach that involves implementing measures without consulting legal counsel or relevant stakeholders risks creating new compliance gaps or implementing ineffective controls, undermining the overall data protection strategy. Professionals should adopt a decision-making framework that begins with understanding the regulatory landscape relevant to Amkor Technologies' operations. This involves identifying all applicable data privacy laws and guidelines. Subsequently, the risk matrix findings should be analyzed in conjunction with these legal requirements to pinpoint specific areas of concern. The next step is to evaluate potential solutions, prioritizing those that offer a clear path to compliance and risk mitigation, ideally with input from legal and technical experts. Finally, the chosen approach should be documented, implemented, and regularly reviewed to ensure ongoing adherence to regulations and to adapt to evolving risks and legal interpretations. Question 5. Strategic planning requires Amkor Technology to evaluate a potential acquisition that promises significant market share expansion. Which of the following approaches best aligns with regulatory compliance and sound corporate governance principles for Amkor Technology? Option A. Prioritize thorough due diligence, including a comprehensive review of the target's financial health, legal standing, and operational synergies before committing to the acquisition. Option B. Base the acquisition decision primarily on positive market sentiment and initial discussions, without extensive verification of the target's financial data or operational viability. Option C. Delay public disclosure of the acquisition talks until a definitive agreement is reached, even if discussions are advanced and likely to become material. Option D. Proceed with the acquisition based on the potential for rapid market share growth, assuming the target's underlying financials are generally positive. The correct answer is A. Prioritize thorough due diligence, including a comprehensive review of the target's financial health, legal standing, and operational synergies before committing to the acquisition. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because Amkor Technology, as a publicly traded company, operates within a highly regulated environment. Strategic decisions, particularly those involving potential acquisitions or significant operational changes, must be made with a keen awareness of their impact on financial reporting, investor relations, and compliance with securities laws. The need for accurate and timely disclosure, coupled with the ethical obligation to act in the best interest of the company and its shareholders, creates a complex decision-making landscape. Careful judgment is required to balance competitive pressures with regulatory obligations. The correct approach involves prioritizing the thorough investigation and due diligence of the potential acquisition target, including a comprehensive review of its financial health, legal standing, and operational synergies. This approach is best professional practice because it aligns with the principles of prudent financial management and corporate governance. Specifically, it adheres to the spirit and letter of securities regulations, which mandate that companies make informed decisions and disclose material information in a timely and accurate manner. By conducting thorough due diligence, Amkor Technology mitigates risks, ensures that the acquisition aligns with strategic objectives, and avoids potential liabilities arising from undisclosed issues. This proactive stance is crucial for maintaining investor confidence and regulatory compliance. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on the potential for rapid market share expansion without adequate financial and legal scrutiny would be professionally unacceptable. This failure stems from a disregard for regulatory requirements that necessitate a sound basis for significant corporate actions. Such an approach risks overpaying for an acquisition, inheriting unforeseen liabilities, or engaging in transactions that are not in the long-term best interest of shareholders, potentially violating fiduciary duties. Another incorrect approach that involves proceeding with the acquisition based on preliminary positive market sentiment alone, without verifying underlying financial data or operational viability, represents a significant ethical and regulatory failure. It demonstrates a lack of due diligence and a reliance on speculation rather than substantiated facts, which is contrary to the principles of responsible corporate conduct and the requirements for accurate financial reporting. A third incorrect approach that involves delaying the disclosure of the potential acquisition talks to the market until a definitive agreement is reached, even if the discussions are advanced and likely to become material. It would also be a regulatory failure. This could be construed as insider trading or market manipulation if information is selectively withheld or released to gain an unfair advantage. Securities laws generally require prompt disclosure of material information that could affect a company's stock price. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a structured approach. 1. Identify the strategic objective and potential benefits. 2. Assess the associated risks, including financial, legal, and operational aspects. 3. Consult with relevant internal departments, legal, finance, operations, and external advisors, legal counsel, investment bankers. 4. Conduct thorough due diligence on any potential partners or targets. 5. Evaluate the impact on regulatory compliance and disclosure obligations. 6. Make a decision based on a comprehensive understanding of all factors, prioritizing long-term value and adherence to legal and ethical standards. 7. Ensure appropriate and timely communication with stakeholders, as required by regulations. Question 6. Examination of the data shows a consistent upward trend in a specific component's defect rate at Amkor Technology over the past quarter, which has not yet been publicly disclosed or factored into current market valuations. You are aware that a significant contract renewal for this component is imminent, and that the defect rate, if publicly known, could negatively impact Amkor Technology's stock price. You also hold Amkor Technology stock options that are set to expire soon. Option A. Continue to monitor the defect rate trend without taking any immediate action or reporting it, assuming it might resolve itself before impacting the stock price. Option B. Immediately report the observed defect rate trend to Amkor Technology's compliance department and refrain from any stock transactions until the information is publicly disclosed or addressed. Option C. Exercise your stock options and sell your Amkor Technology shares before the defect rate information becomes public to mitigate potential losses. Option D. Discuss the observed defect rate trend with a trusted friend who also invests in Amkor Technology, advising them to consider selling their shares. The correct answer is B. Immediately report the observed defect rate trend to Amkor Technology's compliance department and refrain from any stock transactions until the information is publicly disclosed or addressed. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because Amkor Technology, as a publicly traded company, is subject to strict regulatory oversight regarding its financial reporting and disclosure obligations. The pressure to meet market expectations and the potential for personal gain from insider information create a conflict of interest and a significant ethical dilemma. Navigating this requires a deep understanding of securities laws and internal company policies to ensure compliance and maintain market integrity. The correct approach involves prioritizing adherence to Amkor Technology's internal policies and relevant securities regulations, specifically those prohibiting insider trading. This means refraining from trading based on material non-public information, and instead reporting the observation through the appropriate internal channels. This aligns with the principles of fair markets and investor protection, as mandated by regulatory bodies. It demonstrates professional integrity by putting compliance and ethical conduct above personal financial advantage. An incorrect approach would be to proceed with trading based on the observed trend. This action would constitute insider trading, a serious violation of securities laws. It undermines market fairness by giving an unfair advantage to those with privileged information. Another incorrect approach would be to discuss the observed trend with external parties who are not authorized to receive such information. This could lead to a wider dissemination of material non-public information, increasing the risk of market manipulation and further regulatory breaches. A third incorrect approach would be to ignore the observation entirely without any internal reporting. While not directly trading, failing to report potential irregularities could also be seen as a dereliction of duty if it contributes to a larger compliance issue. Professionals in such situations should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes compliance and ethical conduct. This involves 1. Identifying the nature of the information, material and non-public. 2. Consulting relevant company policies and securities regulations. 3. Seeking guidance from legal or compliance departments if unsure. 4. Acting in a manner that upholds market integrity and protects the company and its stakeholders. Question 7. Assessment of the appropriate procedure for an Amkor technology employee to follow when they possess information about an upcoming product launch that is not yet publicly announced and could significantly impact the stock price of a competitor. Option A. Follow Amkor Technologies' established internal protocols for the disclosure of material non-public information, which may involve consulting with the legal or investor relations department. Option B. Discuss the information openly with colleagues in a public cafeteria to ensure it's not kept secret. Option C. Immediately inform a close friend who works at the competitor company about the product launch details. Option D. Wait for the competitor to make a public announcement about their product before mentioning anything to anyone, even if it impacts Amkor Technologies' strategic planning. The correct answer is C. Immediately inform a close friend who works at the competitor company about the product launch details. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge for an employee at Amkor Technology regarding the handling of potentially material non-public information. The core difficulty lies in balancing the need to share information for legitimate business purposes with the strict prohibition against insider trading. Careful judgment is required to ensure compliance with securities regulations and Amkor Technologies' internal policies, protecting both the individual and the company from legal and reputational damage. The correct approach involves adhering strictly to Amkor Technologies' established policies for disclosing material non-public information. This typically means channeling all such disclosures through designated channels, such as the Investor Relations Department or legal counsel, who are trained to manage information flow in a compliant manner. This approach is professionally sound because it directly aligns with regulatory requirements designed to prevent insider trading. Specifically, regulations like the Securities Exchange Act of 1934 in the U.S., assuming U.S. jurisdiction for this assessment, mandate that material information be disclosed to the public in a manner that ensures broad dissemination, rather than selectively to a few individuals. By using designated channels, Amkor Technology ensures that any material information is released in accordance with these regulations, preventing unfair advantages and maintaining market integrity. An incorrect approach would be to directly share the information with a close friend who works at a competitor. This is a direct violation of insider trading laws and company policy. The regulatory failure here is the selective disclosure of material non-public information, which constitutes insider trading or tipping, creating an unfair advantage for the friend and potentially leading to market manipulation. Ethically, it breaches the duty of confidentiality owed to Amkor Technology and its shareholders. Another incorrect approach would be to discuss the information casually in a public place, such as a restaurant. While not direct disclosure to a specific individual for personal gain, this still carries significant risk. The regulatory failure is the potential for the information to be overheard by individuals who could then trade on it, leading to accusations of tipping and market manipulation. Ethically, it demonstrates a lack of professionalism and disregard for the sensitive nature of corporate information. A third incorrect approach would be to wait for a formal company announcement before mentioning anything, even to a colleague who needs the information for a project. While waiting for a formal announcement is generally good practice, withholding information that is critical for a colleague's legitimate work especially if it is not yet considered material for public disclosure, can hinder business operations. The failure here is not a direct regulatory breach in terms of insider trading, but it can represent a failure in internal communication protocols and potentially impact operational efficiency, which, while not a securities law violation, is a professional failing in terms of collaboration and business execution. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a clear understanding of what constitutes material non-public information, a thorough knowledge of Amkor Technology's internal policies on information disclosure, and a commitment to seeking guidance from appropriate internal resources, legal, compliance, investor relations. When in doubt, professionals should always err on the side of caution and prioritize regulatory compliance and ethical conduct over expediency or personal relationships. Question 8. Which approach would be most appropriate for a candidate taking the Amkor Technology hiring assessment test when presented with a scenario involving potential material non-public information about Amkor Technology's upcoming financial performance and asked to analyze its implications within the context of the assessment's regulatory framework? Option A. Prioritize understanding and applying the specific regulatory framework and ethical guidelines provided or implied by the Amkor Technology hiring assessment test, seeking clarification if needed, and answering the question solely based on those parameters. Option B. Attempt to infer the implications of the potential material non-public information to provide a more insightful answer, even if it goes beyond the explicit scope of the assessment's regulatory framework. Option C. Focus on demonstrating general knowledge of financial analysis without deeply engaging with the specific regulatory context of the Amkor Technology hiring assessment test. Option D. Express concern about the ethical implications of the information and suggest delaying the assessment until the information is publicly disclosed. The correct answer is A. Prioritize understanding and applying the specific regulatory framework and ethical guidelines provided or implied by the Amkor Technology hiring assessment test, seeking clarification if needed, and answering the question solely based on those parameters. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because Amkor Technology, as a publicly traded company, must adhere to strict financial reporting regulations. Pressure to meet investor expectations and the potential for personal gain from early knowledge of financial performance create a conflict of interest and a risk of insider trading. Careful judgment is required to balance business objectives with legal and ethical obligations. The correct approach involves prioritizing adherence to the Amkor Technology hiring assessment test's specified regulatory framework, which implicitly governs financial conduct and disclosure. This approach is best professional practice because it upholds the integrity of financial markets and protects the company from legal repercussions. Specifically, it aligns with principles of fair disclosure and prevents the misuse of material non-public information, which is a cornerstone of securities law and ethical business conduct. By seeking clarification and adhering strictly to the established assessment guidelines, the candidate demonstrates a commitment to compliance and ethical behavior, essential qualities for any role at Amkor Technology. An incorrect approach that involves attempting to leverage the information to gain an advantage on the assessment would be a significant regulatory and ethical failure. This would constitute a breach of the assessment's integrity and potentially violate insider trading regulations if the information were indeed material and non-public. Another incorrect approach, such as downplaying the importance of the assessment's regulatory framework, demonstrates a lack of understanding of corporate governance and compliance responsibilities, which are critical for any employee at a company like Amkor Technology. Finally, an approach that focuses solely on personal performance without considering the ethical implications of the information being assessed would also be a failure, as it overlooks the broader responsibility to act with integrity. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with identifying all relevant regulations and ethical guidelines applicable to the situation. This involves understanding the specific requirements of the Amkor Technology hiring assessment test and any overarching legal or ethical codes that govern financial reporting and employee conduct. The next step is to evaluate each potential course of action against these established standards. When faced with ambiguity or pressure, seeking clarification from appropriate sources, such as the assessment administrators or legal counsel, is paramount. The ultimate decision should always prioritize compliance, integrity, and the protection of the company and its stakeholders. Question 9. Implementation of a new business development initiative at Amkor Technology requires leveraging anonymized historical client project data. While the data has been processed to remove direct identifiers, a junior analyst suggests that the anonymization process might not be sufficiently robust to prevent potential re-identification if combined with other publicly available information. The analyst proposes proceeding with the initiative, arguing that the risk is minimal and the potential business benefits are significant. What is the most ethically and legally sound approach for Amkor Technology to take in this situation? Option A. Use the data for the business development initiative, but only after obtaining general consent from all past clients for the use of their anonymized project data. Option B. Proceed with the business development initiative, but implement additional, less stringent data masking techniques to further obscure the data. Option C. Proceed with the business development initiative, relying on the existing anonymization process and the analyst's assessment of minimal risk. Option D. Halt the business development initiative until a thorough, independent audit of the anonymization process can be conducted to confirm its effectiveness in preventing re-identification. The correct answer is C. Proceed with the business development initiative, relying on the existing anonymization process and the analyst's assessment of minimal risk. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the potential conflict between a company's immediate financial interests and its ethical obligations regarding the responsible handling of sensitive client data. Amkor Technology, like any firm, must navigate the complex landscape of data privacy regulations and maintain client trust. The core of the dilemma lies in balancing the desire to leverage data for business development against the imperative to protect that data from unauthorized access or disclosure, even if the perceived risk is low. Careful judgment is required to ensure that all actions align with legal mandates and ethical standards. The correct approach involves a proactive and transparent engagement with the client regarding the proposed use of their data. This means clearly communicating the intended purpose, the specific data points to be used, and the security measures in place to protect it. Obtaining explicit, informed consent from the client before any data is utilized for a new purpose is paramount. This aligns with the principles of data minimization and purpose limitation, which are fundamental to data privacy regulations. By seeking consent, Amkor Technology demonstrates respect for client autonomy and upholds its fiduciary duty to protect their information. This approach mitigates legal risks and strengthens the client relationship by fostering trust and transparency. An incorrect approach would be to proceed with using the client's data for business development without their explicit consent, assuming that the data is not highly sensitive or that the risk of breach is negligible. This failure to obtain consent directly violates data privacy principles and potentially breaches contractual obligations. It exposes Amkor Technology to significant legal penalties, reputational damage, and loss of client confidence. Another incorrect approach would be to use the data, but anonymize it in a way that is not robust enough to prevent re-identification. While anonymization is a valid technique, if not executed properly, it can still lead to privacy violations and legal repercussions. A third incorrect approach would be to rely solely on internal policies without verifying their compliance with current external regulations. Internal policies are important, but they must be grounded in and adhere to the specific legal requirements of the relevant jurisdiction. Professionals should approach such situations by first identifying the relevant data privacy regulations applicable to Amkor Technology and its clients. They should then assess the nature of the data and the proposed use against these regulations and ethical guidelines. A key step is to consult with legal and compliance departments to ensure all actions are compliant. Prioritizing transparency and obtaining informed consent, even when it might seem like an extra step, is crucial for maintaining ethical integrity and mitigating risk. A structured decision-making process involves 1. Understanding the legal and ethical obligations. 2. Assessing the risks and benefits of proposed actions. 3. Consulting with relevant experts. And 4. Choosing the course of action that prioritizes data protection and client trust. Question 10. The audit findings indicate that certain procurement practices at Amkor Technology may not fully align with the company's stated ethical sourcing policy and potentially violate specific clauses within the relevant industry regulations. The findings are preliminary and require further investigation to confirm the extent of any non-compliance. Option A. Disregard the preliminary findings as they are not yet conclusive and continue with existing procurement practices, assuming that any minor deviations are within acceptable industry tolerances. Option B. Instruct the audit team to reevaluate the findings, focusing on aspects that might mitigate the appearance of non-compliance, and delay any external communication until a more favorable interpretation can be established. Option C. Immediately initiate a comprehensive internal investigation to gather all relevant facts, consult with legal counsel regarding regulatory obligations, and prepare to report findings and a proposed remediation plan to the relevant regulatory authority. Option D. Inform the relevant regulatory authority of the preliminary findings and request guidance on how to proceed, without undertaking an internal investigation to avoid prejudicing the outcome. The correct answer is C. Immediately initiate a comprehensive internal investigation to gather all relevant facts, consult with legal counsel regarding regulatory obligations, and prepare to report findings and a proposed remediation plan to the relevant regulatory authority. Explanation: this scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires balancing the immediate need to address a potential compliance issue with the company's established procedures and the potential impact on ongoing business relationships. The auditor's findings, if not handled appropriately, could lead to significant regulatory penalties and reputational damage for Amkor Technology. Careful judgment is required to ensure that Amkor Technology acts ethically and in accordance with its regulatory obligations without causing undue disruption or compromising its integrity. The correct approach involves a thorough, objective investigation of the audit findings, followed by a transparent and timely communication with the relevant regulatory body. This demonstrates Amkor Technology's commitment to compliance and its willingness to proactively address any identified shortcomings. Specifically, initiating an internal investigation to gather all relevant facts and then reporting these findings, along with a proposed remediation plan to the regulatory authority, aligns with the principles of good corporate governance and regulatory adherence. This approach prioritizes transparency, accountability, and the prompt resolution of compliance issues, which are fundamental to maintaining trust with regulators and stakeholders. An incorrect approach would be to ignore or downplay the audit findings. This failure to acknowledge and address potential noncompliance directly violates regulatory expectations for proactive risk management and could result in severe penalties, including fines and sanctions. Another incorrect approach would be to attempt to conceal or misrepresent the findings to the regulatory body. This constitutes a serious ethical breach and a direct violation of laws requiring truthful reporting, leading to severe legal consequences and irreparable damage to Amkor Technology's reputation. Finally, delaying the reporting of findings without a valid justification or a clear plan for investigation also constitutes a failure, as it suggests a lack of commitment to compliance and could be interpreted as an attempt to avoid scrutiny. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes ethical conduct and regulatory compliance. This framework involves 1. Understanding the nature and severity of the issue identified. 2. Consulting relevant internal policies and external regulations. 3. Gathering all necessary facts through an objective investigation. 4. Assessing potential risks and consequences of different actions. 5. Communicating transparently and promptly with relevant stakeholders, including regulatory bodies when required. 6. Developing and implementing a robust remediation plan. Question 11. During the evaluation of Amkor Technology's upcoming investor presentation, a junior analyst discovers significant production delays in a key product line that are likely to impact quarterly earnings. The senior management team is pushing for a highly optimistic outlook to secure further investment. The analyst is concerned that the current draft of the presentation does not adequately reflect these delays. What is the most ethically and regulatorily sound course of action for the analyst to take? Option A. Focus on highlighting the company's strengths and positive aspects, while subtly downplaying the significance of any potential production challenges in the presentation. Option B. Proceed with the presentation as drafted, assuming senior management has considered all factors and that the optimistic outlook is strategically necessary. Option C. Discreetly inform a trusted colleague outside of Amkor Technology about the production issues to gauge their opinion on how to proceed. Option D. Immediately raise concerns with senior management, providing data on the production delays and their potential financial impact, and advocate for revising the presentation to include this information. The correct answer is D. Immediately raise concerns with senior management, providing data on the production delays and their potential financial impact, and advocate for revising the presentation to include this information. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires balancing the company's immediate financial interests with the ethical obligation to provide accurate and transparent information to potential investors. The pressure to present a favorable outlook, even when facing internal challenges, can lead to decisions that compromise integrity. Careful judgment is required to navigate the conflict between business objectives and ethical responsibilities, ensuring that all disclosures are truthful and not misleading. The correct approach involves proactively disclosing the identified production delays and their potential impact on Amkor Technology's financial performance. This demonstrates a commitment to transparency and adherence to regulatory requirements for accurate financial reporting. Specifically, under the framework of the Securities and Exchange Commission (SEC) regulations, particularly Rule 10b-5 of the Securities Exchange Act of 1934, companies have a duty to disclose material non-public information that could affect an investor's decision. Failing to disclose known production issues that could materially impact earnings would be considered a misrepresentation or omission of a material fact, leading to potential legal and reputational damage. This approach prioritizes investor protection and market integrity. An incorrect approach would be to downplay or omit the production delays in the investor presentation. This constitutes a failure to disclose material information, violating SEC regulations and ethical standards. Such an action could be interpreted as an attempt to mislead investors, leading to severe penalties, including fines, lawsuits, and damage to Amkor Technology's reputation. Another incorrect approach would be to provide overly optimistic projections that do not account for the known delays. This is also a form of misrepresentation, as it creates an inaccurate picture of the company's future performance. This violates the principle of providing fair and balanced information to investors. Finally, attempting to shift blame to external factors without acknowledging internal operational issues would be a partial truth that still omits critical information, failing to meet the standard of full and fair disclosure. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes ethical conduct and regulatory compliance. This involves 1. Identifying potential ethical conflicts and regulatory obligations. 2. Gathering all relevant facts, including internal operational issues and their potential impact. 3. Consulting with legal and compliance departments to understand specific disclosure requirements. 4. Evaluating the potential consequences of different courses of action, both ethically and legally. 5. Choosing the approach that ensures full, fair, and accurate disclosure, even if it presents short-term challenges. Question 12. The assessment process reveals that a candidate, during a technical interview for a role at Amkor Technology, inadvertently overhears a confidential discussion between senior executives regarding an upcoming, significant product development that is not yet public knowledge and is expected to substantially impact the company's stock price. The candidate recognizes this information as material non-public information. Which of the following represents the most appropriate and ethically sound course of action for the candidate? Option A. Immediately inform the interviewer of what was overheard, express discomfort with proceeding, and request to pause or withdraw from the assessment process until the information is publicly disclosed. Option B. Discreetly note the information and consider its implications for their personal investment decisions after the assessment, while continuing the interview as if nothing was heard. Option C. Attempt to subtly steer the interview questions towards the overheard topic to gauge the executive's reactions and confirm the validity of the information. Option D. Continue with the assessment, assuming the information is not truly material and that their personal integrity will prevent them from acting on it inappropriately. The correct answer is B. Discreetly note the information and consider its implications for their personal investment decisions after the assessment, while continuing the interview as if nothing was heard. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the potential conflict between a candidate's personal financial interests and their duty to act with integrity and in the best interests of Amkor technology. The hiring assessment is designed to evaluate not only technical skills, but also ethical judgment and adherence to regulatory frameworks. A candidate's response to such a situation reveals their understanding of insider trading regulations and their commitment to maintaining a fair and transparent market. The correct approach involves immediately disclosing the potential conflict of interest and recusing oneself from any further involvement in the assessment process that could be influenced by the non-public information. This demonstrates an understanding of the importance of confidentiality and the prohibition against using material non-public information for personal gain, which is a cornerstone of securities regulations. By proactively reporting the situation, the candidate upholds the principles of integrity and fairness expected of all employees, especially those in positions that may have access to sensitive information. This aligns with the spirit and letter of regulations designed to prevent market manipulation and protect investors. An incorrect approach of proceeding with the assessment without disclosure would be a direct violation of insider trading laws. This is because the candidate possesses material non-public information that could unfairly influence their performance or their perception of the company's prospects, potentially leading to decisions that benefit them personally at the expense of Amkor technology or other stakeholders. Another incorrect approach of attempting to downplay the significance of the information or rationalize its use would also be a failure. It demonstrates a lack of understanding of the strict prohibitions against the misuse of such information and a disregard for ethical conduct. Such actions could lead to severe legal and reputational consequences for both the individual and Amkor technology. Professionals should approach such situations by prioritizing transparency and adherence to regulatory requirements. A robust decision-making framework involves 1. Recognizing the potential conflict or ethical breach. 2. Immediately ceasing any activity that could be influenced by the problematic information. 3. Proactively disclosing the situation to the appropriate authority, in this case, the hiring manager or HR department. 4. Seeking guidance on how to proceed, which may involve recusal from certain aspects of the process. This systematic approach ensures that ethical standards and legal obligations are met, safeguarding both personal integrity and the reputation of the organization. Question 13. Performance analysis shows a significant, albeit unintentional, overstatement in Amkor Technology's recent quarterly performance metrics due to a data input error. The deadline for submitting the final report to the board of directors is imminent, and correcting the error would mean missing the target. What is the most ethical and compliant course of action for the analyst responsible for this report? Option A. Blame the data entry team for the error and submit the report with the overstatement, suggesting they be retrained. Option B. Discreetly adjust the data to meet the target without explicitly documenting the adjustment or informing relevant parties of the original error. Option C. Immediately report the data discrepancy to the compliance department and senior management, advocating for a corrected report to be submitted, even if it means missing the deadline. Option D. Proceed with submitting the report as is, assuming the error is minor and will likely go unnoticed, and address it in a subsequent report. Correct answer is C. Immediately report the data discrepancy to the compliance department and senior management, advocating for a corrected report to be submitted, even if it means missing the deadline. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires balancing the company's immediate financial interests with the ethical obligation to provide accurate and transparent information to stakeholders. Amkor Technology, as a publicly traded company, is subject to regulations that mandate fair disclosure and prohibit misleading statements. The pressure to meet performance targets can create an environment where individuals might be tempted to misrepresent data, which can have severe consequences for the company's reputation, investor confidence, and legal standing. Careful judgment is required to navigate this conflict and uphold ethical standards. The correct approach involves immediately reporting the discrepancy to the appropriate internal channels, such as the compliance department or senior management, and ensuring that the performance analysis is corrected before it is finalized or disseminated externally. This upholds Amkor Technology's commitment to integrity and compliance with relevant financial reporting regulations. Specifically, this aligns with principles of accurate financial reporting and the duty of care owed to investors and the market. By proactively addressing the issue, Amkor Technology demonstrates a commitment to transparency and avoids potential violations of securities laws that prohibit material misstatements or omissions. An incorrect approach of ignoring the discrepancy and proceeding with the flawed analysis would constitute a serious ethical and regulatory failure. This would violate the principle of honesty and integrity in financial reporting, potentially leading to violations of securities regulations that require accurate financial disclosures. Another incorrect approach of attempting to subtly adjust the data without proper documentation or explanation is also problematic. This could be seen as an attempt to manipulate results, which is unethical and could be construed as fraudulent if discovered. Furthermore, it undermines the audit trail and internal controls, making it difficult to verify the accuracy of financial information. Finally, an approach of blaming the data source without investigating the root cause or taking corrective action is insufficient. While identifying the source of error is important, the responsibility lies with Amkor Technology to ensure the accuracy of its reported performance, regardless of the origin of the data. This failure to take ownership and implement corrective measures is an ethical lapse and a breach of professional responsibility. Professionals facing similar situations should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes ethical conduct and regulatory compliance. This involves first identifying the ethical dilemma and potential conflicts of interest. Next, they should consult relevant company policies, codes of conduct, and applicable regulations. Seeking guidance from supervisors, legal counsel, or compliance officers is crucial. The decision should be based on principles of honesty, transparency, fairness, and accountability, ensuring that all actions are defensible and align with the company's long-term interests and legal obligations. Question 14. The evaluation methodology shows that a key supplier for Amkor Technology, with whom the company is negotiating a significant contract renewal, is managed by an individual with whom an Amkor Technology procurement manager has a close personal friendship outside of work. The procurement manager is a key decision maker in the contract renewal process. What is the most ethically and professionally responsible course of action for the Amkor Technology procurement manager? Option A. Continue with the contract renewal process as normal, but make a note in their personal files about the friendship. Option B. Inform the supplier that they must find a new manager to handle the Amkor Technology account due to the personal relationship. Option C. Proceed with the contract renewal process, assuring themselves that their professional judgment will not be compromised by the personal friendship. Option D. Immediately disclose the personal relationship to their direct supervisor and the compliance department, and recuse themselves from all discussions and decisions related to this supplier's contract renewal. Correct answer is D. Immediately disclose the personal relationship to their direct supervisor and the compliance department, and recuse themselves from all discussions and decisions related to this supplier's contract renewal. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires an employee at Amkor Technology to navigate a situation where a personal relationship could potentially influence business decisions, creating a conflict of interest. Maintaining objectivity and adhering to Amkor Technology's ethical standards and relevant regulatory guidelines is paramount to ensure fair dealing and prevent any perception of impropriety. The core of the challenge lies in balancing professional responsibilities with personal connections. The correct approach involves promptly disclosing the personal relationship to the appropriate authority within Amkor Technology, such as a manager or the compliance department, and recusing oneself from any decision-making processes that involve the supplier. This demonstrates transparency, upholds the company's code of conduct, and aligns with principles of good corporate governance and regulatory compliance, which typically mandate disclosure of potential conflicts of interest to prevent undue influence and ensure fair competition. An incorrect approach would be to proceed with the supplier selection without disclosure, hoping that the personal relationship does not influence the decision. This fails to meet ethical obligations and regulatory expectations for transparency and conflict of interest management. It creates a significant risk of actual or perceived bias, potentially leading to a suboptimal business decision for Amkor Technology and violating principles of fair procurement. Another incorrect approach is to attempt to manage the situation independently by assuring oneself that the decision will be objective. While well-intentioned, this bypasses established company procedures for conflict of interest management and lacks the necessary oversight and accountability. It does not provide assurance to Amkor Technology or regulatory bodies that the process was fair and unbiased. Finally, an incorrect approach would be to ignore the situation entirely and continue as if the personal relationship does not exist. This is a failure of professional responsibility and ethical conduct. It neglects the potential for unconscious bias and fails to proactively address a situation that could compromise the integrity of Amkor Technologies' business dealings. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes transparency, adherence to company policy, and regulatory compliance. This involves recognizing potential conflicts of interest, understanding the company's reporting procedures for such situations, and acting decisively to disclose and mitigate any risks. When in doubt, seeking guidance from a supervisor or the compliance department is always the most prudent course of action. Question 15. Governance review demonstrates that a junior engineer at Amkor Technology has discovered what appears to be an unauthorized access to a database containing sensitive customer information. The engineer is unsure if it is a full-blown breach or a misconfiguration, but the potential implications are significant. The engineer is aware that Amkor Technology has strict internal protocols for reporting security incidents and is also aware of the general regulatory requirements for data breach notification. The engineer is also under pressure to meet project deadlines for the current quarter. Which of the following is the most appropriate immediate course of action for the junior engineer? Option A. Report the suspected unauthorized access directly to the relevant external regulatory authority without first notifying internal Amkor Technology departments. Option B. Attempt to independently investigate and resolve the suspected unauthorized access to avoid involving other departments and to meet project deadlines. Option C. Immediately report the suspected unauthorized access to Amkor Technology's internal compliance or legal department, adhering to the company's established incident reporting procedures. Option D. Wait to gather more definitive proof of a breach before reporting, to avoid causing unnecessary alarm, and to ensure the report is fully substantiated. The correct answer is C. Immediately report the suspected unauthorized access to Amkor Technology's internal compliance or legal department, adhering to the company's established incident reporting procedures. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it involves a potential conflict between a company's immediate financial interests and its ethical obligations regarding data privacy and regulatory compliance. The pressure to meet quarterly targets can incentivize overlooking or downplaying potential data breaches, creating a dilemma for the employee tasked with reporting. Careful judgment is required to balance business objectives with legal and ethical responsibilities. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves immediately reporting the suspected data breach to the designated internal compliance or legal department. As per Amkor Technologies' established internal policies and relevant data protection regulations, this demonstrates adherence to the company's governance framework and proactive compliance. Specifically, this aligns with the principles of data protection laws that mandate timely notification of breaches to relevant authorities and affected individuals. By escalating the issue internally, the employee ensures that the company can initiate its incident response plan, conduct a thorough investigation, and fulfill its legal obligations without delay, thereby mitigating potential harm and regulatory penalties. Incorrect approaches analysis. Failing to report the suspected breach or delaying the report to gather more definitive proof is ethically and regulatorily unsound. This approach risks violating data protection laws that require prompt notification, potentially leading to significant fines and reputational damage for Amkor Technology. It also demonstrates a lack of integrity and a failure to uphold the company's governance standards. Attempting to resolve the suspected breach independently without involving the appropriate internal departments is also problematic. While well-intentioned, this bypasses established protocols and may lead to an incomplete or incorrect assessment of the situation. It could also inadvertently compromise evidence or fail to meet the specific reporting requirements mandated by law, thus exposing Amkor Technology to further risk. Reporting the suspected breach directly to external regulatory bodies without first informing internal compliance or legal departments is premature and can undermine the company's internal governance structure. While external reporting may eventually be necessary, the initial step should always be to engage the company's internal resources to manage the incident effectively and ensure all internal procedures are followed before external communication. Professional reasoning. Professionals facing such situations should first consult their company's internal policies and procedures regarding data breaches and incident reporting. They should then prioritize immediate, transparent communication with the designated internal compliance or legal team. This ensures that the company can respond systematically and in accordance with all applicable laws and regulations. Documenting all observations and communications is also crucial. Question 16. Compliance review shows that a senior procurement manager at Amkor Technology has a close personal friendship with a key executive at a major supplier. The manager has been involved in recent negotiations for a significant contract renewal with this supplier. What is the most appropriate course of action for Amkor Technology to ensure ethical conduct and regulatory compliance? Option A. The procurement manager should immediately cease all communication with the supplier to avoid any appearance of impropriety without formally reporting the relationship. Option B. The procurement manager should continue to participate in the contract negotiations, but informally inform their direct supervisor about the friendship, assuming it will not influence their judgment. Option C. The procurement manager should rely on informal assurances from colleagues that the friendship poses no actual conflict of interest and proceed with their involvement in the contract renewal. Option D. The procurement manager should formally disclose their relationship to Amkor Technology's compliance department and recuse themselves from all further decision-making and negotiation processes related to this supplier's contract. The correct answer is D. The procurement manager should formally disclose their relationship to Amkor Technology's compliance department and recuse themselves from all further decision-making and negotiation processes related to the supplier's contract. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a common challenge in regulated industries where a company, Amkor Technology, must navigate potential conflicts of interest when engaging with a key supplier. The challenge lies in ensuring that business decisions are made impartially and in the best interest of Amkor Technology, rather than being influenced by personal relationships or potential future benefits. Maintaining the integrity of procurement processes and adhering to ethical standards are paramount to prevent regulatory scrutiny and reputational damage. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves a formal, documented process of disclosing the relationship and recusing oneself from any decision-making related to the supplier. This aligns with standard ethical guidelines and regulatory frameworks that mandate the identification and management of conflicts of interest. By disclosing the relationship, Amkor Technology's compliance department can assess the risk and implement appropriate controls. Recusal ensures that the individual with the potential conflict does not influence the outcome of procurement decisions, thereby preserving the fairness and objectivity of the process. This proactive and transparent method upholds the principles of good corporate governance and regulatory compliance. Incorrect approaches analysis. An approach that involves continuing to participate in decisions while downplaying the significance of the relationship is ethically unsound and likely violates regulatory requirements. This failure to disclose and manage a potential conflict of interest can lead to biased decision-making, favoritism, and ultimately, financial detriment to Amkor Technology. It also exposes the company to significant regulatory penalties and reputational harm. Another incorrect approach is to cease all communication with the supplier without proper disclosure or a formal process. While seemingly a way to avoid conflict, this can disrupt business operations, potentially violate contractual obligations, and may not be the most effective way to manage the conflict. A more structured approach, involving disclosure and potential reassignment of duties, is generally preferred. Finally, an approach that relies on informal assurances from the supplier or colleagues that no conflict exists without a formal review and documentation process is insufficient. Informal assurances lack the rigor required by compliance frameworks and do not provide an auditable trail of due diligence. This can leave Amkor Technology vulnerable to allegations of negligence or complicity if a conflict later arises or is discovered. Professional reasoning. Professionals at Amkor Technology should adopt a framework that prioritizes transparency, documentation, and adherence to established conflict of interest policies. When a potential conflict arises, the first step is to identify and fully disclose the relationship to the appropriate compliance or legal department. Following disclosure, A risk assessment should be conducted to determine the appropriate mitigation strategy, which may include recusal from relevant decision-making processes, oversight by an independent party, or other control measures. This systematic approach ensures that Amkor technology operates ethically and in compliance with all applicable regulations, safeguarding its reputation and financial stability. Question 17. Process analysis reveals that a key client of Amkor technology has requested access to aggregated, anonymized performance data from other clients within the same industry segment, stating it is for market trend analysis. Amkor Technologies' internal policies and relevant industry regulations strictly prohibit the sharing of any client-specific or aggregated client data without explicit, written consent from all involved parties due to strict confidentiality and data privacy requirements. How should an Amkor Technology representative respond to this client's request? Option A. Politely decline the request, explaining that Amkor Technology is bound by strict confidentiality agreements and data privacy regulations that prevent the sharing of such information, and offer to discuss Amkor Technology's own market insights if appropriate. Option B. Agree to the request, assuring the client that the data will be anonymized and aggregated to prevent identification, as the client is a significant business partner. Option C. Provide the requested data, as the client's stated purpose is for market trend analysis, which is a common industry practice. Option D. Forward the request to the legal department without informing the client, hoping they will find a way to fulfill it without explicit refusal. Correct answer is A. Politely decline the request, explaining that Amkor Technology is bound by strict confidentiality agreements and data privacy regulations that prevent the sharing of such information, and offer to discuss Amkor Technology's own market insights if appropriate. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge for an employee at Amkor Technology due to the inherent conflict between a client's request and the company's established ethical guidelines and regulatory obligations. The employee must navigate the pressure to maintain a client relationship while upholding the integrity of Amkor Technology's operations and adhering to the specific regulatory framework governing its business. Careful judgment is required to avoid actions that could lead to regulatory penalties, reputational damage, or legal repercussions for Amkor Technology. The correct approach involves politely but firmly declining the client's request, explaining that Amkor Technology operates under strict confidentiality agreements and data privacy regulations. This approach prioritizes ethical conduct and regulatory compliance. By adhering to these principles, the employee safeguards Amkor Technology from potential breaches of contract, violations of data protection laws, such as those governing the handling of sensitive client information, and the erosion of trust with other stakeholders. This aligns with the professional responsibility to act with integrity and to ensure that all business dealings are conducted in a manner that is both legal and ethical. An incorrect approach would be to agree to the client's request without proper authorization or consideration of the regulatory implications. This could involve sharing proprietary information or client data that Amkor Technology is legally bound to protect. Such an action would constitute a breach of confidentiality, potentially violating data privacy laws and contractual obligations. This failure to uphold regulatory and ethical standards could result in significant fines, legal action, and severe damage to Amkor Technology's reputation, making it difficult to secure future business. Another incorrect approach would be to ignore the client's request and provide no response. This passive stance fails to address the client's query and leaves Amkor Technology vulnerable to potential misunderstandings or accusations of non-compliance. It also misses an opportunity to reinforce Amkor Technology's commitment to ethical practices and regulatory adherence. A professional decision-making process in such situations should involve: first, understanding the client's request and its potential implications. Second, consulting internal policies and relevant regulations. Third, seeking guidance from legal or compliance departments if unsure. And fourth, communicating a clear, professional, and compliant response to the client. Question 18. Compliance review shows that Amkor Technology has entered into a complex arrangement with a key supplier that involves upfront payments and performance-based incentives. The legal department has drafted a contract that appears to shift significant risks and rewards to Amkor Technology, but the supplier retains nominal control over certain aspects of the product's final delivery. Considering Amkor Technologies' commitment to accurate financial reporting, which approach to accounting for this arrangement would be most compliant with regulatory expectations? Option A. Defer all revenue recognition related to this arrangement until the final product is fully delivered and accepted by Amkor Technology, even if partial performance and payment have already occurred. Option B. Analyze the transaction to determine the economic substance of the arrangement, focusing on the transfer of risks and rewards, and account for it based on that substance, potentially recognizing revenue and costs over time as performance obligations are satisfied. Option C. Account for the transaction solely based on the legal wording of the contract, assuming the supplier's nominal control dictates the accounting treatment, regardless of the economic realities. Option D. Recognize revenue from the supplier's upfront payment immediately, as it represents a commitment from the supplier, and defer recognition of Amkor Technologies' performance obligations until all contractual milestones are met. Correct answer is D. Recognize revenue from the supplier's upfront payment immediately, as it represents a commitment from the supplier, and defer recognition of Amkor Technologies' performance obligations until all contractual milestones are met. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because Amkor Technology, as a publicly traded company, operates under stringent regulatory oversight. The challenge lies in balancing the need for timely and accurate financial reporting with the ethical obligation to ensure all disclosures are complete and not misleading. Misinterpreting or selectively applying accounting standards can lead to material misstatements, which can have severe consequences for investors, the company's reputation, and the individuals involved. Careful judgment is required to navigate complex accounting issues and ensure adherence to the relevant regulatory framework. The correct approach involves a thorough and objective assessment of the transaction against the applicable accounting standards, specifically focusing on the substance of the arrangement rather than its legal form. This requires consulting with internal accounting experts and potentially external auditors to ensure a comprehensive understanding of the transaction's implications. The regulatory justification stems from the principles of fair presentation and transparency mandated by accounting standards. For Amkor Technology, this means adhering to generally accepted accounting principles, GAAP, or International Financial Reporting Standards, IFRS, depending on its reporting jurisdiction, and ensuring that all financial statements accurately reflect the economic reality of its operations. This approach upholds the integrity of financial reporting and protects stakeholders. An incorrect approach of prioritizing the legal form of the transaction over its economic substance would fail to provide a true and fair view. This is a direct violation of fundamental accounting principles that emphasize substance over form. Another incorrect approach, which is to defer the recognition of revenue until all contractual obligations are definitively met, even if partial performance has occurred and payment is assured, could lead to understating revenue and profits. This misrepresents the company's performance and can mislead investors about the company's operational progress. Finally, an approach that involves aggressive interpretation of accounting rules to achieve a desired financial outcome without a sound basis in the standards constitutes an ethical breach and can lead to non-compliance. This can be viewed as an attempt to manipulate financial results, which is a serious regulatory and ethical failure. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with understanding the specific transaction and its context. This involves identifying all relevant accounting standards and regulatory guidance. Next, they should gather all pertinent documentation and facts. The core of the decision-making process involves applying the identified standards to the facts, considering the economic substance of the transaction. If there is ambiguity, seeking expert advice from internal accounting teams, legal counsel, or external auditors is crucial. The final decision should be well documented, clearly articulating the rationale and the accounting treatment chosen, with a clear link back to the applicable standards and regulations. This systematic and well-documented approach ensures compliance and ethical conduct. Question 19. Investigation of a procurement manager at Amkor Technology who is responsible for evaluating bids for a new component supplier. The manager discovers that one of the most competitive suppliers is owned by their sibling. What is the most appropriate course of action for the procurement manager to ensure Amkor Technology's procurement process remains fair and compliant? Option A. Immediately disclose the familial relationship to their direct supervisor and the compliance department, and recuse themselves from all aspects of the supplier evaluation and selection process for this particular bid. Option B. Discreetly favor the siblings' company in the evaluation criteria to ensure they receive the contract, as it is a personal opportunity to support family. Option C. Ignore the familial relationship and continue with the evaluation as normal, assuming no one will discover the connection. Option D. Proceed with the evaluation, ensuring they are objective and select the best supplier based on merit, as their personal relationship will not influence their professional judgment. Correct answer is A. Immediately disclose the familial relationship to their direct supervisor and the compliance department, and recuse themselves from all aspects of the supplier evaluation and selection process for this particular bid. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge for an employee at Amkor Technology due to the potential conflict between a personal relationship and professional responsibilities, specifically concerning the procurement process. Maintaining objectivity and fairness in supplier selection is paramount to ensure Amkor Technology secures the best value and quality, and to uphold its reputation. The challenge lies in navigating this personal connection without compromising ethical standards or regulatory compliance. Careful judgment is required to prevent even the appearance of impropriety. The correct approach involves immediate and transparent disclosure of the personal relationship to the appropriate internal stakeholders, such as the compliance department or a designated manager, and recusal from any decision-making processes involving the supplier in question. This upholds the principle of avoiding conflicts of interest, a cornerstone of ethical business conduct, and often mandated by internal company policies and relevant regulatory frameworks governing corporate governance and fair business practices. Transparency ensures that Amkor Technology can implement appropriate safeguards, such as assigning oversight to an independent party, thereby maintaining the integrity of the procurement process. An incorrect approach would be to proceed with the evaluation and recommendation without disclosing the relationship. This failure directly contravenes ethical obligations to act in the best interest of Amkor Technology and could violate regulations or internal policies requiring disclosure of conflicts of interest. It creates an environment where decisions might be perceived as biased, undermining trust among stakeholders, and potentially leading to unfavorable business outcomes for Amkor Technology. Another incorrect approach is to attempt to subtly influence the evaluation in favor of the connected supplier, even if the relationship is not disclosed. This is a clear breach of professional integrity and fiduciary duty. It constitutes dishonest conduct and could have severe legal and reputational consequences for both the individual and Amkor Technology. Finally, an incorrect approach would be to ignore the relationship and hope it goes unnoticed. This passive approach is negligent and fails to address the inherent risk of a conflict of interest. It leaves Amkor Technology vulnerable to accusations of unfair practices and potential regulatory scrutiny if the relationship is discovered later. The professional decision-making process in such situations should involve a proactive assessment of potential conflicts of interest. When a personal relationship could influence professional judgment or create the appearance of bias, the immediate step is to consult the company's code of conduct and relevant policies. If a conflict exists or is perceived, transparent disclosure to the appropriate authority within Amkor Technology is essential. Subsequently, recusal from any decision-making or influencing activities related to the matter is the responsible course of action. This structured approach ensures adherence to ethical principles and regulatory requirements, protecting both the individual and the organization. Question 20. Compliance review shows that Amkor Technology's current data handling procedures for candidate information during the hiring assessment process may not fully align with the specific data privacy regulations mandated by the jurisdiction governing the Amkor Technology hiring assessment test. What is the most appropriate course of action for Amkor Technology's hiring and compliance teams? Option A. Implement changes based on the data privacy regulations of a different, more technologically advanced country, believing these will be more robust and therefore sufficient. Option B. Proceed with the current procedures, assuming that minor deviations are unlikely to be detected or result in significant penalties. Option C. Rely on general data privacy best practices that are common across the industry, assuming they will adequately cover the requirements of the specific jurisdiction. Option D. Immediately update all data handling procedures to strictly conform to the data privacy regulations of the jurisdiction governing the Amkor technology hiring assessment test, even if it requires temporary adjustments to the assessment timeline. Correct answer is D. Immediately update all data handling procedures to strictly conform to the data privacy regulations of the jurisdiction governing the Amkor technology hiring assessment test, even if it requires temporary adjustments to the assessment timeline. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent conflict between business objectives and regulatory compliance, particularly concerning data privacy and security. Amkor Technology, as a global entity, must navigate a complex web of regulations. The challenge lies in ensuring that all operational practices, especially those involving sensitive stakeholder data, strictly adhere to the specified regulatory framework without compromising efficiency or business goals. Careful judgment is required to balance these competing demands. The correct approach involves prioritizing the explicit requirements of the specified regulatory framework, which in this case is the Amkor Technology hiring assessment tests governing jurisdiction. This means that any data handling, storage, or processing must be conducted in a manner that is fully compliant with the laws and guidelines of that jurisdiction. This approach is correct because it upholds the legal and ethical obligations of Amkor Technology, safeguarding stakeholder trust and avoiding potential legal repercussions. Adherence to the specified regulatory framework is paramount for maintaining operational integrity and reputation. An incorrect approach would be to assume that general industry best practices or the regulations of a different, more lenient jurisdiction are sufficient. This is a regulatory failure because it disregards the specific legal mandates of the Amkor Technology hiring assessment tests jurisdiction. Another incorrect approach would be to prioritize speed or cost-effectiveness over strict compliance, potentially leading to data breaches or unauthorized access. This represents an ethical and legal failure, as it exposes stakeholders to undue risk and violates the principles of data protection mandated by the governing framework. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with a thorough understanding of the applicable regulatory landscape. When faced with a compliance review, the first step is to identify any discrepancies between current practices and the specific requirements of the governing jurisdiction. The next step is to consult with legal and compliance experts to interpret the regulations accurately. Decisions should then be made based on a clear assessment of risk, prioritizing full compliance even if it requires additional resources or time. A proactive approach to identifying and mitigating compliance gaps is essential for responsible corporate conduct.